So am I also an extreme right-wing fascist? Ladies and gentlemen, this is enough. I can't take it anymore. Recently, Framework, the company that produces modular computers with Linux pre-installed, decided to sponsor Hyprland. And as we know, Hyprland is a breath of fresh air in the Linux desktop landscape. Well, what happened is absurd. A discussion arose where some people criticized this choice, calling Hyprland an extreme right-wing fascist project. Within the debate, the creator of Omarchy is also mentioned, whom I myself heavily criticized in the past, but from a technical standpoint. Yet in this circumstance, I find myself deeply close to his position. Let's try to understand better. The criticisms are based on the fact that Hyprland isn't viewed favorably by some members of the Free Desktop project, created to ensure interoperability between various graphical environments in Linux. Due to some discussions that took place on Hyprland's Discord channel, which led to the author being banned from the project. The crux of the matter is that Framework decided to also promote Omarchy Linux, created by David Heinemeier Hansen, already the creator of Ruby on Rails, a distribution based on Hyprland. And all of this generated controversies not for technical reasons, but political ones, for the author's alleged ideological views. There's no technical dispute here. Technology has nothing to do with it. It's pure politics. And it seems to me that our world is increasingly dividing everything into categories: white projects and black projects, A-series users and B-series users. This undermines one of the most powerful and intrinsic forces of open source, the community. To be honest, a part of the community and the projects linked to it seems to wave a certain political ideology, reducing others to enemies, extremists, or people to exclude. In Hyprland videos or those of Omarchy's creator, I've never found any political reference. And even if these developers were right-wing, left-wing, or of any other conviction, frankly, I care very little. What I see instead is an opposite phenomenon: projects and organizations that define themselves as inclusive, but end up excluding those who don't align with their political or social vision. This is where the paradox is created. I'm not against inclusivity, nor against respect for racial or sexual differences. That's not the point. I'm against it when these values are transformed into ideological flags, emptied of their original meaning, and used as tools of division and social struggle. An open-source organization, free software, is a universal good. It's created, used, and shared by everyone. It shouldn't paint itself with any political flag. The true goal of our world is technological freedom, sharing, collaboration. These values in themselves embody real inclusivity, not the imposed kind. But today, we see projects that aren't included in repositories because they're not aligned with a certain culture, or people banned for not sharing policies of inclusion and promotion of LGBTQ+ values. I'm sorry to say it, but this isn't the context where these issues should become central. Our communities are technical, diverse, global. They should include, precisely because they're inclusive, people from every part of the world and with every type of vision. And ladies and gentlemen of Silicon Valley, the world is not under your flag. The world is made of differences, of visions, cultures, values, and different religions. LGBTQ+ culture is one of these, not the only one. I wonder how a Muslim could align with certain ideologies. It's impossible. Or how a Polish person, or an African, could feel involved in American class struggles when their priorities are water, healthcare, or survival. Open source communities are no longer inclusive. They're no longer neutral fields where the different souls of the world meet under one flag, that of open source. They've become aligned entities. And this is deeply unfair, wrong, and destructive. We've seen various examples of silencing or removal of people who didn't align with DEI policies, or with NixOS or Mozilla's inclusion initiatives. Were they right? We don't know. But in the same way, those organizations that chose to take political sides were also wrong, instead of remaining neutral spaces where priorities are technical and not ideological. Social psychology offers us concrete tools to understand how wokeism, paradoxically, ends up generating the conflicts it claims to want to resolve. This isn't about opinions, but about documented and replicable mechanisms. Henry Tajfel and John Turner demonstrated that when group identities are overemphasized, even positive ones, mechanisms of division are automatically activated. Two devastating effects emerge: in-group, out-group bias, One's own group is perceived as morally superior and the other as problematic. Competition for moral status, the so-called competitive victimhood, where people compete over who is more virtuous or more oppressed. Cass Sunstein documented how people with similar opinions discussing among themselves don't moderate but radicalize. This is what happens in woke communities. Each member seeks to demonstrate their ideological purity, pushing the group toward increasingly extreme positions. Joshua Clayman and Youngwon Ha showed that when emotional motivation is strong, the brain becomes a defense attorney, not an impartial judge. In the woke context, only evidence confirming the narrative of systemic oppression is sought. Every criticism is labeled as a microaggression. The same behavior is judged differently depending on who performs it. Elizabeth Noel Neumann described how people tend to self-censor when they believe they're in the minority. This generates an apparent unanimity, reinforcing the false conviction that everyone thinks this way. Muzaffar Sharif demonstrated that competition for limited resources generates conflict. In wokeism, the limited resource is symbolic capital, the right to speak, to be heard, to define what is right. Jack Brame explained that when a threat to freedom of thought is perceived, people react with rebellion. Wokeism, imposing mandatory language and correct thoughts, produces exactly this reaction, pushing even moderate people toward more extreme positions. John Jost observed that people need to perceive the system as just. When an ideology describes society as totally corrupt or oppressive, it generates a dissonance that can only be resolved in two ways: total adherence or total rejection. No balance, exasperated inclusion ends up excluding, not out of bad faith, but because of how the human mind works. Open source communities have always been an example of collaboration between different minds, different cultures, different ideas, united by a single value: free software. Letting ideological drift overwhelm this balance means destroying the power of that diversity. Only from neutral ground can common solutions, balanced visions, and real innovations emerge. And this also applies to managing differences. Neutrality isn't indifference, it's the necessary condition for all voices to coexist. Our organizations must depoliticize themselves. They must return to being spaces for technical discussion, open to every idea, vision, and culture. Competence, not ideological alignment, must return to being the measure. Open source communities, becoming ideological battlefields, lose their original function: to unite. Science teaches us that to build truly inclusive communities, we must stop transforming inclusion into identity and return to focusing on common goals that transcend divisions. But I also want to say something clear. Those who refuse to use a distribution or program, accusing it of being ideologized, make the same mistake as those who censure it. You're playing their game. You treat OpenSUSE, NixOS, or Firefox as if they were Windows. And this is the same behavior as those who exclude for political reasons. A spiral of hatred and radicalization has been created between users and communities that is eroding the deepest value of open source: collaboration. Open source is already, in its essence, the very concept of inclusion and equality. It didn't deserve to be dragged into the American magma of wokeism and anti-wokeism. Enough. I don't want to hear anymore that Debian is woke or that OpenSUSE is woke. They're not. Debian and OpenSUSE are open source projects, free and accessible to everyone. We can't apply ideological flags either through censorship or through counter-censorship. Our world must return to thinking about technology accessibility, free code, open formats, digital freedom, not cultural wars imported from the United States. Even Eric Raymond, author of The Cathedral and the Bazaar, criticized the codes of conduct imposed in open source projects. And rightly so. The direction we've taken has very little that's open, democratic, and free. A true global community includes differences, not only of religion, sex, or orientation, but especially of ideas and worldviews. This was the implicit pact of our union: open code, not political conformity. And before accusing or labeling those who think differently, let's remember one thing. No one ever asked who developed Debian, whether they were black, gay, a Jehovah's Witness, or an alien. It didn't matter. All that mattered was that it worked, that it was free, and that we could improve it together. Some digital activists today confuse defending rights with cultural imposition, and this climate of suspicion and ostracism risks transforming into systematic exclusion. Let's stay lucid, critical, and above all free. Let's remain a community. And yes, I remain in disagreement with many of Omarky's technical choices, but on this topic I recognize his complete rightness.